Pick up and deliver.
We are live.
Oh, there we go, yeah.
There we go. We don't have anybody yet. We'll give it a second for everybody to join in, as we always do. But, as always, John, you're traveling this morning. Where are you traveling to?
I am. I've got to pop into the GTA. I've got to help with a presentation this afternoon. So quick in and out day trip today just to take care of that.
Oh, I mean, that's not a bad thing. It's not a far drive. And you're joining us from the road. Like a trucker, a couple weeks ago, you were in New York and traveling around there. This week, you're traveling to Toronto. You seem to be the driver. And you hate driving.
I do. I'm not a driving fan. So yeah, I've been bouncing around a lot lately. And you were around. I think it was last week. Obviously, you were sort of out in the field. I think a bit, a sign of the times, right? Is summer's still going, but everything is kind of still going into Q4, and depending on your fiscal year, your calendar year, I think there's still a lot going on. So it gets busy in logistics in the summer sometimes, anyways.
Well, we got the one dedicated listener, which we always say good morning to. Good morning, Kat. And we're going to start off with the Wake Up and Deliver episode 9. And we got Robert as well. Perfect. The dedicated listeners here, and that's fantastic. We're going to start off with some morning coffee for our brains like we usually do. I think I have a interesting one, as I always do. I think I always have interesting ones. And this one's a quote by John D. Rockefeller. He goes, "I have spoken of the necessity of being frank and honest with oneself about one's own affairs. Many people assume that they can get away from the truth by avoiding thinking about it, but the natural law is inevitable, and the sooner it is recognized, the better." I like that self-reflection. You can't lie to yourself. You can't not be honest with yourself. The more you kind of put it away, the more anxiety you build within yourself when it comes to pretty much anything.
Yeah, no, I like that quote. Funny enough, I say something similar all the time in the process improvement or continuous improvement type work that I do. Whether it was my teams in corporate or things that I do now with different clients, I always tell, you can't lie to yourself. You have to be brutally honest about, where you're at, where your capabilities are, what you can do, what you can't do, what you can say yes to, what you have to say no to. It's incredible how many improvements can come just from that exercise.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So this morning we were going to talk about a few different things, but I think we should start off with what we were chatting about before we went live here, John. A little bit about the pricing world. I think with everything, with all the changes, how does one figure out what rates and what they should price, or how to even price anything? I thought I'd let you kind of run with that idea because you had a few good points before we started.
Yeah, pricing is dirty. It's so hard. Well, because the thing is that if you think about it at the most basic level, right? Whenever anyone makes a price for anything, whether you're at a retail store, whether you're online, an auction, no matter what you're doing, price is just tied into this concept of value, right? And it's like, how much do I have to give up for what I'm going to get back? And people just play with pricing because it's the fastest way to increase value in any situation. Dollar stores work because they've dropped the price so much that the perceived value is so high. Costco and Walmart, for example, dominate the concept of rollbacks or value for dollar. And it absolutely just carries their brand in business. Logistics is tough because so much of what is done, whether it's transportation, warehousing, a last mile delivery, is highly commoditized. So very price driven. And it makes it difficult for people to get outside of, different pricing models or expected pricing models because they're so afraid that they won't be considered. And before we went live, we were talking about platforms and the amount of time it takes to price things manually. Should you use these tools? Should you not use these tools? Like, where are you sitting at? You were saying you're doing a ton of pricing these days with Monarch, and that it's obviously something that takes a lot of your effort and attention and time.
Yeah, because it's not a simple. Everybody kind of thinks that you have the perfect price in mind and you can just move things, but you got to make sure that it makes sense in your whole flow and it makes sense to your partners and makes sense to your business. And you got to figure out your head holes, your back holes, and you got to figure out what is making sense for the overall business. Am I going to take a loss on this lane to get that lane? Am I going to get that lane if I make that clear that I'm going to take a loss in this lane? And does that strategy always works? And that's why these, and we talked about again, you said these pricing models that have recently come out that help price it out for you and helps give you your quick rate. I don't know if they're as much useful in that right now or not. I'm a strong believer that they're going to create a static price across the network, and I don't know if everybody will be looking forward to that, because then how do you differentiate yourself from the next person, the next carrier? It's hard.
Well, exactly right. And look at the difference. So the housing market for anybody, and this is pretty much anyone like Canada, US, Europe, doesn't matter. Like all of the big cities are so terrible these days. You essentially get these standardized pricing models because of comps and things like that. The only thing that saves that industry is availability.
Yeah.
Supply and demand and stuff like that. Unfortunately, when you're talking about logistics and transportation, there's always there's a lot of people to do the work. It's not as sort of tight or anything like that as the housing market. So what you end up getting is kind of more in reverse. You get a high commoditization of the pricing. I think I was telling you, I saw someone post that's in my network, and they were asking about pricing and saying, hey, every load that we did was essentially at break even or a loss, more or less. I'm sure they made money on some of them, but we need to do better on pricing. We need to do this, right? And that, to your point, is because people are falling into so many traps of, do I price this lane to get that lane, and do I underprice to get this customer, and do I grab the customer now for future value? All of these things that are very strategic, but also very trappy, right? Like I can't tell you the amount of times in the last 20 years that I've had sales VPs or whatever being like, we're just going to underprice this and do it at a loss because we're going to be able to, raise the rates later or get more business from the customer. And, full transparency, I think I saw it happen fewer times than I could count on one hand in terms of that strategy actually taking hold. Like, have you seen a lot of success from that kind of approach?
No, and I don't know if because the customer then sees you differently too. Like you talked about earlier, that value changes for you as well, right? So when you're one of those quote unquote the cheapest price out there, it doesn't benefit you, and also not being the most expensive, because then you don't get as much business. And you got to find that value middle ground. That you got to offer something else, and that goes across for full truckload, LTL, parcel, warehouse. Even I would even say utility, because I know Robert, wants to make sure that we talk about utility. Not to say that he's asking us to, but we can't forget about the utility of things. And one of the things that I was gonna kind of mention, because you posted about it a few weeks ago, about is a lot of these bigger brands that have great pricing models are moving away from LTL because I don't think they're making as much money in it as they were before. So that pricing aspect of it, even just TFI, I think on FreightWaves was talking about their targets for LTL operations are there because their pricing models aren't yielding the results they needed, and you think if they can't figure it out, like what's the true price and how do you figure out that pricing aspect of it?
Well, sorry, just on that for everybody too, like different types of things. So one thing that I've always done, and I will always recommend, no matter what, it does not matter what you are doing. You should always have your time and activity-based costing in your head. Whether you actually end up using it to price to your customer or not, it blows my mind how many times like I've engaged with someone and I'm helping them improve their quality of revenue, and it's like, okay, so where did this price come from? And honestly, it's tantamount to being like, I reached into the hat and pulled out a number that I thought was kind of right based on everything else I've seen. And it's like, without any real consideration or even understanding of the fact that like that may work for other people, it may not work at all. It may work for them, but not for you, because no one really takes the time to understand. Like even right now, I'm driving down the highway and I see a tractor trailer right in front of me, full load, 53 footer. No matter what this guy is priced at, wherever he started and wherever he's going, and whether or not he's doing a single drop or he's doing multi drops or he's doing a pickup or not, like everything about what's going to cost me to pay to have this done is related to time. And I advocate that to everybody all the time. And it's still probably the simplest, most effective thing that anyone can do for their business that almost no one does.
Yeah, and I just had a secret comment that was sent to me, and it's from one of our number one fan here. It says, "Price sets an illusion of value, like Dior," and I thought that was a pretty actually good quote. And that's true, right? Like you have that value of illusion of how do you price something and get that value from it. And my train of thought just went sideways. Sorry. I was going to say, John, going back to you though, how do you figure out that activity based rate? Like, how do you come up to that formula to get that value? That's where I was going. Get that value for that price that you're kind of developing.
So for me, you just break it down to all of the honest parts, right? So this tractor that's in front of me right now, right? You have to think about things like, okay, what's the capex on the actual tractor, right? You know, how much was it worth? 180,000, 200,000. What was it amortized over? Is it like the carrier's own equipment, or does it look like it's the customer's equipment, for example? How long is the lane, right, in terms of the pure drive? How much do I maybe need to modify that a little bit for congestion, or do I feel that my drive is already got congestion in it? How much time do I have when I pick up? How much time do I have when I drop off? Am I using the full capacity of this truck, and do I feel wholly responsible for it? Or, you know, do I feel that I'm essentially more in an LTL situation where I don't feel maybe I should be 100% beholden for, like, you know, the full cost of the vehicle and the time? So to me, I break it down to all of the parts, right? And a lot of the stuff I'll do on the delivery side, you know, it's just that it's like, what's the actual labor? What's the vehicle? What's the fuel? Is there a reefer? Yes, no. Like, are you putting in benefits? Are you putting in any extra cost? Are you putting in admin? But you basically load yourself up. And I do it on a full-time basis. So if I were running this person or this activity essentially full-time, and it could be completely dedicated for the asset, how much does it come out to? And then I usually break it all the way down to, you know, per hour, per minute. And then I start using that backwards, kind of like as a model, saying, okay, well, then this trip is only 10 hours, or it's, you know, it's 12, or it's 36, or it might only be 4. So that's how I do it. It's not necessarily the fastest thing, but what I like about it, especially, you know, for a lot of the stuff you're doing these days, is that you can build a lot of these activity-based models, and that's what you really should think of them, kind of like guides. You can build them for your most popular lanes or for your most important customers, that, you know, this 80-20 rule and all of these things. And then at least you're getting a better decision-making process. So, like, probably what I would say starts to fall into like data-informed decision-making rather than just randomly picking numbers, because you know that, well, someone else might be able to do the lane for 1,000. You know, you might have to do it for 1175, no matter what, unless you're going to lose money. And then that it's still okay to do it for 1,000, but you just 100% know that you're doing that at a loss and that you need it to generate some other value for your business somewhere else.
And you just supercharged my mind. Thank you for giving that morning coffee that I needed. And it kind of goes back to how carriers or even new trucker companies come on board, because it's hard for them to determine that value. And even I know some even larger ones that don't know their pricing down to how much is it costing me to run empty miles, to deadhead, to not fill my truck to full capacity when I have LTL. How, you know, if I pick up from this location instead of that location, or I mismanage my optimization of where I pick up and where I deliver, how does that affect my price? They just look at the overall end sum of the week and they go, hey, did we make money this week or we didn't? And it's very reactive and not proactive on their approach. And sometimes saying no to a specific customer because they're, you know, they might be great value, might not fit into your network, is the right answer. And I think that educational piece to a lot of these newer companies, including brokers, because I think brokers fall in that trap too. You know, I've done it in the past too, where I go, hey, if they're selling this for $1,000, there must be someone buying it. So I should be able to get it for $975 and still make my $50 off of it, or $25, or someone that's going to get that value. But I fail to realize, or people fail to realize, that there could be someone out there that has a specific or knows a specific backhaul, or has something that you're not aware of, that helps bring that price down for them. And then you've offset like you said, your activity-based pricing way to the wrong direction, and you get into this constant flow of negative dollars, and you're just chasing it now because you have no way of getting out of it.
Yeah, exactly. So here's another example, and names will be redacted because I probably shouldn't get too deep into the details, but exactly on that principle. When I was doing some work a number of years ago, got into a really interesting quality of revenue and profitability analysis of trying to be like, how are competitors pricing at a level that, like, I know at an activity-based level is literally a loss leader. It wasn't like a loss leader like, oh, I'm losing $1. It was like, that wasn't worth doing, and it should be bleeding you dry type pricing. And it was like, well, how are they able to do it, and how are they able to do it so consistently that they're winning, client after client after client, and they're not going bankrupt?
Yeah.
So what ended up happening is that you finally figured out, looking at internal business and looking at the market and whatever, there were a few clients that were so different in profitability for what they were asking, right? And then when you took those clients and you took not just the core service, but you took some value-added services, which honestly everybody should be trying to sell packages and not individual items. But anyways, you took these two things together, and the profitability of a very, very small but stable and high frequency customer dominated. Like, it was so clear how much business was being built on the back of these few customers. And it was like, well, that's how they're doing it. And now, that might sound really obvious, and maybe like, oh, well, that's good. But I mean, that's inherently very risky to build a lot of business on a few clients, because if you then lose those accounts or that account or whatever, now you're really struggling with the business that you have left. If, for example, that customer comes back to you and wants to start negotiating price, you're absolutely locked into having to do it because you can't afford to lose the customer. So any discount is better than a loss. So that starts to erode profitability. But it was really crazy to see. And the funny thing is that internally at the time, people thought that type of business was so bad, or that it was so time consuming, because it was. Like, when you really did the costs of like what it took to do all of that work, it was very high, like much higher than, other type of mainstream accounts. But when you just looked at it all in, about like all the revenue, all the activity, and then all the costs, they were still so much better of a client that it was basically like, every time you sign on one of these other accounts at this other paradigm, you're essentially eating part of this pie, and it's a very finite supply, and sooner or later you're going to run out if you also don't build back those types of customers.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting to see what happens.
And just to add, anybody who does want to speak, and I saw Nancy raise her hand for a second, but if you do want to come add value to the conversation, by all means do raise your hand, and we'll bring you up and we'll add you to the conversation. Don't be shy. To that point, it's funny, John, I was having this conversation the other day. I visited, Nancy's back, raising her hand. Perfect. Allow her to join us.
Hello, everybody.
Good morning.
Hello. Hello, Matthew. It's my pleasure joining you every episode. Really, I do like it a lot. I do like this kind of conversations. It's a great value adding. Thank you.
Thank you for that.
Okay. I like what Matthew just mentioned, and the point is that it's about customer base. The more we are able to build a healthy customer base, the more that everything is going to grow organically. So this is what I do believe in.
Yeah, but how do you build that organic growth?
It's not only about that depending on few number of members or few number of customers, but the issue is all about healthy growth. Healthy growth or organic growth, it mainly depends on customer base. So that's why I like what Matthew have just mentioned. It's all about how we are managing growth in our business. So thank you for this comment.
Yeah, no problem. I was just gonna say, like, that the challenge though is how do you determine what's a healthy customer? Because everybody thinks every customer is a great customer, and they don't know that sometimes what you might consider, an SME or outside of your realm of vision, to be the better customer than the obvious one. One of the things everybody kind of goes for is the Fortune 500, the WalMarts, the Amazons, but those are the ones that are analytically driven and drive those prices in the wrong direction sometimes for you. And that's why it's important to have that, like you said, that organic uh, customer with the organic growth that is fitting into your way of operating and being able to price that correctly.
Well, so here's my thought, and Nancy, by all means, you're welcome to jump in too. Please do. But when I was in the food industry, right, dairy, just a very low margin business. Like you're not shipping iPhones. You're not going to be able to. You're not looking to pay top dollar for all of these like crazy services. But what the dairy really did, and what the food industry really did, is that it was so cyclic and high volume and consistent. And when I was discussing sort of activity with different shippers and different, sorry, not different shippers, different carriers for us being a shipper, that would be my pitch to try to get them more interested, was selling the stability, the consistency, and the reliability of the work. So I think it's really important that you understand like what really connects, right? Sometimes there's really high value. Sometimes people jump to the logos, like you said, just because they want the brand recognition. And then sometimes it's like, okay, well, what are the pillars that I can build my business on, that help generate revenue, that's profitable revenue, but that isn't just, like a hit or miss type thing that you may or may not have.
And I'll hand it over to you, Nancy, if you wanted to add some final words there. And if you're not, it's okay too.
Thank you all. Thank you all for this discussion. The point is just I wanted to highlight that, uh, or I want to ask, what kind of value do you mean when you say that we want to give value to the customers? What kind of value do you mean?
Well, that's a great question. I'll let John answer that because I know he has a quick answer. I need a second to think about that
I
one.
know. I don't have a quick answer. I think that's tough. I think value really depends on, that's everything that everyone does, right? You're transforming something, you're providing a service, you're doing something. It helps, the other person's business. So, what value? How do you make their business better, more stable, more reliable? How do you help them with sales? How do you help them lower their costs? Typically, like I was saying before, price is just the easiest quote unquote way to create value and to change the perceived value, because the more I give for the lower I charge, the more perceived value anyone would have, right? That's why Temu, for example, is able to blow up and become so popular in a couple of years, is ultra low prices. And the biggest feedback that comes isn't anyone saying that the quality is amazing or that the products themselves are mind blowing, but everybody is almost satisfied with the value they got for what they put in. So I think that that's what it is. And when you're trying to create more value, I think the challenge that we have in logistics is how do you improve that value perception from a customer without just leaning on price? So what other types of services can you include? What other ways do you operate? How do you communicate? How good is your reporting? Are you proactive? Are you
I think you're missing.
Solution or innovator?
I think you're missing a big one in there too. So how do you create that value for the brand? Because sometimes you just get value from your brand identity as well. And how do you build up that brand identity through different means, right? And then you kind of spin roll into that value.
When
There. Go ahead, Nancy.
when I ask it this question, I'm asking because the value here is different. We have different partners, and definitely we're not controlling the whole cycle. Maybe because I'm coming from different background, I'm not from the logistics background. That's why things for me are different.
Hmm.
Because there are multiple partners in the whole cycle. So how do you define value? That's why I'm asking. I mean that it's not only about the price, it's not only about getting job done or whatever, but maybe for me, I what I have seen just till now, maybe transparency is a value. Uh,
And that is a
maybe
great point.
yeah, maybe transparency, maybe keeping things updated, maybe time sensitive issues are valuable. So that's why I have asked about the value in logistics, maybe because I have different background. That's why that was my question. Thank
No,
you for
no,
the perfect answer anyway.
I think that that's a great example, and I really love the thinking and the share there that way, because you're 100% right. People get locked into assuming what they think adds value or doesn't add value. Transparency, I would say that is probably one of those things that probably adds a lot of value in a lot of situations, but almost no one will consider it as it, when they're thinking about it. So, like, I agree with you. I think that there's a lot more either activity or different types of things that businesses of all types can do to create value for their customers, or for the people that they're working with. But you do have to challenge maybe just the assumed thinking on it.
Well, yeah, challenge the thinking on it, and how you perceive it yourself as well. Because up until, like, to our conversation, I've always thought of logistics, the value, the pricing, the dynamics of it, and the little niche of it, how you create the specific niche on what you're doing. But to the point here is there's a value to it outside of those realms, and you could be adding value through. You talked about it earlier, John, creating those problem-solving solutions for the supply chain through the beginning to the end. Maybe getting involved in things and providing a different perspective on transparency that the customer didn't know about, because everybody kind of resorts back to, I can only provide value on that pricing. I think 95% of people focus on that 95% pricing value. And then you spoke about it earlier, is how do you add that additional value added services to that customer to help make it a package and make your price seem a little bit more digestible.
Yeah, no, but I mean, even look what you're doing, right? You're right in your approach, and we've joked about it sometimes, but like, the concept of like, logistics architect and this or that, or the customer service or the customer experience. I mean, people speak about that because it adds value, it adds perceived value, right, for someone buying, because it's like, well, do I want better engagement? Do I want a better partner? Do I want someone that's going to tell me more, include more, do better for me? All of these things, like, they all add value. I think everyone has to accept that price, unfortunately, is probably one of the biggest for the majority of businesses. Logistics or not, just because of the fact that it's the easiest. It's kind of like a universal thing. I mean, our currency, completely changed our economic structure, from bartering and different types of things. But like, it's like, that's the easiest way to understand value, because everybody essentially grows up with the concept of, I have to give something to get. So yeah, I think the challenge for most people is, how do you not make that the only, sort of part of the value chain, and what more can you start doing for customers that will make their life easier, that will make their execution better, that will make their world better, that's not just about price.
And it's not easy. That's not an easy thing to do. If everybody could do it, everybody would be doing it. And I think that's why you just fall back on the more comfortable thing. But we are at that time. It is 8:00, where we want to be conscious of everybody's time. Thank you so much, Nancy, for joining the conversation this morning and talking about value and pricing. It did kind of change the dynamic of our conversation and the value that we brought to everybody listening today. And as always, join us next week. And John, I'll leave you with the final words, as always, if you can close us off this morning.
Yeah, no, I hope everyone has a good week, and keep thinking differently. I'd love to pick up the conversation next week and see who comes away with, 2 or 3 new ideas for creating value in whatever space they're in. I'd love to be able to bring it back and see what happens over the course of 7 days.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Have a good day, everybody.